The gilded cage of Elias Thorne's life was constructed from soundproof glass and polished steel. From his office on the 80th floor, the city below was a silent, sprawling circuit board, a complex system he had learned to manipulate with cold precision. He was the architect of a global hospitality empire, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and five-star perfection. Yet the silence in his life was no longer a sign of peace. It was the sound of a profound and numbing emptiness. It started with a letter. It arrived not via his executive assistant or a secure email, but in a simple, hand-addressed envelope slipped into the company's internal mail. There was no signature, just the shaky, elegant cursive of someone who had been with his company for a very long time. "Dear Mr. Thorne," it began, "I remember when your first restaurant opened. There was a heart to it. We felt like we were part of something. Now we are just numbers on a spreadsheet. You built an empire, but you lost the soul." Elias read the letter a dozen times. The words didn't accuse, they mourned. They spoke of a decay he had been too high up to see. He had spent years optimizing supply chains, maximizing profit margins, and acquiring competitors. In the process, had he created a kingdom with no subjects, only servants? The decision was swift and absolute. He would go back to the floor, not as a CEO on a staged tour, but as one of the nameless, faceless employees he had seemingly forgotten. He created a new identity, Leo, a man in his late 30s looking for a fresh start after a supposed business failure. He chose one of his flagship restaurants, the Gilded Compass, a place praised in magazines for its flawless service, but criticized in online employee forums for its toxic work culture. He walked in for his first shift as a busboy, wearing ill-fitting black pants and a starchy, unfamiliar shirt. The manager, a man named Davies, with a slick smile and cold, reptilian eyes, barely glanced at him. "Your job is to be invisible," Davies instructed, his voice a low sneer. "Clear tables, don't talk to the guests, and stay out of my way." Elias, now Leo, nodded, his jaw tight. He spent the day in a blur of clattering dishes and half-eaten food. He saw the fear in the eyes of the young servers when Davies walked by. He saw the forced, brittle smiles they gave to customers. The soul of this place wasn't lost, it had been suffocated. And then he saw her. Her name was Maya. She was a waitress, moving through the chaotic dining room with a quiet, centered grace. She wasn't the fastest, nor the loudest, but she had a stillness about her that drew his attention. She treated every customer with the same unwavering, gentle respect, whether they were a free-spending tourist or a student nursing a single cup of coffee for hours. There was a weariness in her soft brown eyes, but it was overshadowed by a deep, unshakable dignity. Elias watched her all night, a forgotten feeling stirring in his chest. It was a feeling of recognition, like seeing a single, resilient flower growing through a crack in the concrete. He didn't know her story, but he knew, with a certainty that unsettled him, that she was the soul the letter had been talking about.
Elias decided to put the system and her to the test. During the peak of the dinner rush the next evening, he intentionally spilled a glass of water, sending it cascading across a table and onto the floor. He watched, feigning embarrassment, to see how the staff would react. Davies stormed over, his face a mask of fury. "Clumsy oaf!" he hissed at Elias under his breath, before turning a saccharine smile to the patrons. "My deepest apologies. We'll have this cleaned immediately." He barked at a young busboy to clean it up, his tone dripping with contempt. But before the boy could move, Maya was there. She knelt, without a word, and began soaking up the water with fresh napkins. her movements calm and efficient. She glanced up at Elias, offering a small, reassuring smile. "It happens to the best of us," she said softly. Davy shot her a look of pure venom, but said nothing in front of the guests. Later, Elias saw him corner her by the kitchen entrance. "Don't you ever undermine my authority again," Davy seethed, his voice a low whisper. "Your job is to take orders, not to show initiative. Is that clear?" Maya simply nodded, her face pale, but her gaze steady. "Yes, Mr. Davies." The moment, however, that truly fractured Elias's cynical worldview came near the end of the night. An old, unhoused man, his clothes thin and worn, shuffled into the restaurant, drawn by the warmth and the smell of food. He stood near the entrance, not begging, just looking, his eyes filled with a deep, hollow hunger. Davies was on him in a second. "Get out. We don't serve your kind here." The old man flinched, turning to leave, but Maya intercepted him. "Please, wait," she said, her voice clear and kind. She turned to Davies. "Mr. Davies, he isn't bothering anyone. Let me get him something to go." "Absolutely not," Davies snapped. "That comes out of the restaurant's profits." "No," Maya said, her hand going to the small, worn wallet in her apron. "It will come out of mine." She led the man to the counter, packed a warm meal of leftover roast chicken and bread, and paid for it herself at the register. She handed the bag to the man with a simple, human instruction. "Stay warm tonight." Elias watched from the shadows of his station, his heart constricting in his chest. He had seen million-dollar charity checks written at galas, but he had never witnessed an act of generosity so pure, so costly to the giver. This woman, who he knew from a glance at the payroll, was barely making ends meet, had given what little she had without a moment's hesitation. When his shift ended, he approached her table as she was counting her tips, a meager collection of crumpled bills. He placed a crisp $100 bill on the table. "You dropped this," he said, his voice a little rough. She looked at the bill, then up at him, her eyes searching his face. She knew he was lying. "I can't take this," he said. "You didn't take it. I'm returning it." He turned and walked away before she could argue, but he felt her eyes on his back, a silent question hanging in the air between them. He had come here to find a problem in his company. He had never expected to find a solution to the hollowness in himself. Elias, living as Leo, made the Gilded Compass his new home. He took every shift he could, not for the money, but for the proximity to Maya. He learned her rhythms. He saw the way she would sketch on napkins during her short breaks, intricate, beautiful drawings of fantastical creatures and serene landscapes. She had a hidden world inside her, an artist's soul trapped in a waitress's apron. He also learned the source of the deep sadness in her eyes. One evening, as they polished silverware and the quiet after-hours hum of the restaurant, she spoke of her grandmother. "She's all I have left," Maya said, her voice soft, her gaze distant. "She has dementia. Some days she remembers me, some days she doesn't. The care facility is expensive. Every penny I make goes to keeping her there, where she's safe." Elias listened, saying nothing, his heart aching for her. He saw now that her quiet sacrifice was a constant, draining battle. She was working herself to the bone not for herself, but for someone she loved, for a memory of a person who was slowly fading away. His admiration for her deepened into something more complex, something protective. He started leaving small things for her, a brand new set of sketching pencils on her locker, a gourmet coffee left anonymously on the break room table, an extra blanket for the homeless man she often fed. He did it all under the guise of a secret admirer, knowing she would never accept charity directly from Leo, her fellow busboy.
Meanwhile, Davies's tyranny grew worse. He reveled in his power, docking pay for minor infractions, stealing credit for successes, and pitting the staff against each other. He seemed to have a particular cruelty reserved for Maya, whose quiet dignity was a constant affront to his authority. He would assign her the most difficult tables, lose her tip slips, and make snide remarks about her distracted nature, just loud enough for others to hear. Elias watched, his rage simmering just beneath the surface. He was gathering evidence, documenting every instance of abuse, every broken labor law. His legal team was building a case that would not just fire Davies, but obliterate him. But he had to wait. Exposing Davies now would mean exposing himself, and he wasn't ready. He needed to understand the full extent of the rot. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was the end of the month, and the pressure on Davies was high. Corporate had been questioning his profit margins. He was looking for a scapegoat. That night, after the restaurant closed, Davies called Maya into his office. Elias, stacking chairs nearby, pretended not to listen, but every nerve in his body was on high alert. "There's been a discrepancy," Davies said, his voice dangerously smooth. "The cash deposits from the last 3 nights are short, almost $500. "What?" Maya's voice was a shocked whisper. "That's impossible. I balance the register myself each night." "Well, the numbers don't lie," Davies said, leaning back in his chair with a smug look. "And you're the only one who had access to the safe after closing." Elias felt a cold fury wash over him. Davies was framing her. It was a classic, cowardly move to cover his own incompetence, or more likely, his own theft. "I would never steal," Maya said, her voice trembling but firm. "You know that." "What I know," Davies sneered, "is that you're desperate. I've seen your file, the medical bills for your grandmother. It must be tempting."
Maya stood frozen, the accusation hanging in the air like poison. She looked from Davies' smug face to the open ledger on his desk, and she knew she had been trapped. It was her word against his, and in the rigid hierarchy of the restaurant, the manager's word was law. "This is a lie," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. "Prove it," Davies challenged, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. He was breaking the one person in the restaurant whose spirit he could never touch. "Until you can explain where the money went, I'm putting you on unpaid suspension. And believe me, my official report to corporate will ensure you never work in this industry again." Tears pricked at Maya's eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not in front of him. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking with his. "You won't get away with this." "Oh, honey," Davis chuckled, "I already have." She turned and walked out of the office, her back ramrod straight. She didn't look at Elias as she passed him. She collected her things from her locker in a daze and walked out into the cold night, her quiet dignity the only thing she had left. Elias stood in the darkened dining room, the silence screaming with injustice. The rage he had been suppressing for weeks finally boiled over. This was no longer an investigation. This was a rescue mission. He had seen enough. The soul of his company wasn't just lost, it was being systematically murdered by men like Davies. The next morning, Elias Thorne walked into the Gilded Compass. But he wasn't Leo the busboy. He was the founder and CEO. He wore a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, his presence radiating an aura of absolute power that made the entire morning staff freeze in their tracks. Davies, who was barking at a server, stopped mid-sentence, his jaw dropping. Mr. Thorne? What are you doing here?" "I believe the more appropriate question, Davies,
is what you are still doing here," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. He walked past the stunned manager and addressed the entire staff. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice resonating through the silent room. "For the past month, I have been working alongside you as a busboy named Leo." A collective gasp went through the room. "I came here to find out if the heart of this company was still beating. And what I found was a culture of fear, abuse, and disrespect, all fostered by one man." He turned his glacial gaze on Davies, who had gone pale. "I saw you belittle your staff. I saw you create an environment so toxic that good people were forced to work in silence. And last night, I witnessed you falsely accuse an innocent woman to cover your own tracks." That's not true," Davies stammered. "Isn't it?" Elias said, pulling out his phone. He played a recording. Davies' voice, clear as day, threatening Maya in the office. Elias had planted a listening device in the room hours before. "You are fired, Davies. Security will escort you out, and my legal team will be in touch regarding the missing funds, which I'm sure we will find you've been skimming for months." Davies stood, speechless and utterly defeated, as two stern-looking security guards emerged and led him away. Then Elias turned back to the staff, his expression softening. "This ends today. From this moment on, this company will return to its founding principles: respect, dignity, and compassion." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the crowd of shocked faces. "Now, can someone please tell me where I can find Maya Flores?"
No one knew where Maya had gone. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and she wasn't at her apartment. A cold knot of fear tightened in Elias's stomach. What if Davies' accusation had been the final blow? What if she had simply given up? He spent the rest of the day turning the restaurant upside down. He found the missing money exactly where he expected, tucked away in a hidden compartment in Davies' desk. He spoke to every employee, listening to their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. He promoted the head chef, a kind and talented man Maya had always respected, to interim manager. But with every passing hour, his worry for Maya grew. Finally, in the late afternoon, he remembered her mentioning the care facility where her grandmother lived. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead he had. He found her in a small, sunlit garden behind the facility. She was sitting on a bench, a sketchbook open on her lap, staring at a bed of wilting roses. She looked smaller, more fragile than he had ever seen her. "Maya," he said softly, approaching her slowly. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of fear. "Mr. Thorne, what are you doing here?" "I was looking for you," he said, sitting on the bench beside her. "And please, call me Elias." The story spilled out of him. The anonymous letter, his undercover mission, the evidence against Davies. He told her everything, his voice filled with a regret so profound it was almost a physical presence. "I am so sorry, Maya," he finished, his voice rough with emotion. "I let it go on for too long. I should have stepped in sooner. I was trying to get the whole picture, but I never should have let you get hurt in the process." She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When he was done, she simply looked down at her sketchbook. On the page was a half-finished drawing of a single withered rose, its petals curling and brown at the edges. "This is how I feel," she whispered. "Like something that was once beautiful is just gone." "Nothing is gone, Maya," he said, his voice firm. "Davies is gone. The charges are gone. Your job is waiting for you." "I'm not a waitress, Elias," she said, finally looking at him. The weariness in her eyes was still there, but now there was a flicker of something else, something steely. "That's what I did. It's not who I am." "I know," he said. He had seen the artist, the quiet leader, the compassionate soul. "That's why I'm not offering you your old job back." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim portfolio. He opened it on the bench between them. Inside were high-resolution prints of her napkin sketches, which he had secretly collected and had professionally scanned. "This is who you are," he said, his finger tracing the edge of a drawing of a mythical-looking forest. "You're an artist, a brilliant one." She stared at her own drawings, seeing them for the first time not as idle doodles, but as real art. "I want to offer you a new position, creative director for the entire Thorn Hospitality brand. I want you to redesign our menus, our interiors, our entire aesthetic. I want you to bring the soul back, not just to one restaurant, but to all of them. I want you to fill them with this." He tapped the sketchbook. "With your light."
Maya was speechless. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of sorrow or stress. They were tears of overwhelming, unbelievable hope. "And your grandmother's care," he added quietly, "will be taken care of for the rest of her life. Consider it back pay for all the heart you've poured into a company that didn't deserve you." She finally found her voice, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Maya, that letter, the one that started all of this, it was anonymous. But I think I know who wrote it. It was you, wasn't it?" A small, watery smile touched her lips. She nodded. "I had to believe that the man who built this company was better than the one who was running it." "He wasn't," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you reminded him of who he was supposed to be." He reached out, his hand gently covering hers on the sketchbook. It wasn't the touch of a CEO to an employee. It was the touch of a man who had found something real in a world of artifice, something true in a life of carefully constructed lies. "I don't want to just be your boss, Maya," he whispered. "I want to build something with you, not just restaurants, but a life." She looked at him, at this powerful, complicated man who had seen the worst of his own creation and chosen to fix it, who had seen the best in her, even when she couldn't see it in herself. And in that quiet garden, surrounded by dying roses that suddenly seemed full of the promise of spring, she gave him her answer. She didn't say a word. She simply turned to a fresh page in her sketchbook, and with a steady hand, she began to draw. She drew two figures, standing side by side, looking out at a rising sun, and for the first time, neither of them was alone. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that true leadership is about compassion, not control, and that even in our darkest moments, a single act of kindness can change everything, then we invite you to stay. Subscribe to CEO Stories Uncovered for more tales that touch your heart, heal your soul, and remind you that everyone has a story worth seeing. Thank you for watching.